I'm Sandja Brügmann, and this is New Global Mind, where we explore leadership for systems transformation. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. I'm excited to introduce to you our special guest today is Alexander Laszlo. He's the president of the Bertalan Fee Center for the Study of System Sciences, director of research at the Laszlo Institute for New Paradigm Research, and doctoral faculty in sustainability leadership at Fielding Graduate University. As professor of system science and curated Emergence, his research and teaching focus on evolutionary leadership, collaboration, and systems thinking, recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award for Visionary Leadership, author of over 120 journals, books, and encyclopedia publications, and a 6-degree belt in traditional Taekwondo. I'm also happy to inform that he is part of the Passion Institute's growing associate team of experts. Alexander, it's such a pleasure for me to have you here on the video podcast, New Global Mind. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Sandja. The pleasure is mine, but I'm delighted to share it with you.
Our topic for today is Syntony Sense, Evolutionary Intuition for World Changers, a topic I look very much forward to exploring with you. Before we delve into that, you had mentioned you might have a little gift for us.
Well, part of, as we will explore here, part of Syntony is very much this notion of flowing with emergence. It's not just flowing with what is, but it's also flowing into what could be and being part of contributing to that could be space. When I'm out in nature and I can walk around, sometimes there's a place, it's a tree or a vista, and it's almost as if I am called to stop or I am stopped. And then the flute plays me. I associate it with the tree nearby or maybe with a sudden opening. I will play it briefly for you. Here we are.
Beautiful.
You see, this is a shorter flute. I actually like the tone of this one more.
Thank you so much.
Please. Thank you.
It's such a wonderful way to land in the moment. Let's dive into the topic. So, Syntony Sense and Evolutionary Intuition. Can you explain what those two wordings mean?
It's pretty dense because that's a compact version of what we're about to explore. So we have our standard 5 senses, and we know that there's more. And intuition is a kind of sense as well. I'm looking at this in a way where we could really call on this sense that I see operating in nature in different ways, and that it has become kind of atrophied in our species because we've become very reliant on technology to sense things for us. It's as if we have bumpers and feelers on our antennas, but there's not us. It's not part of us anymore. We're relying on these other systems to check out our environment and make us aware of things and so on. I'll give you an example of some places. You have fish that move together in groups, and you have two different kinds of schoolings. You have public and private. No, I'm kidding. Sorry. You have polarized schools and non-polarized schools. In the non-polarized schools of fish, they're all facing different directions, but they're all swimming together. It's very close proximity, but they're facing different directions. Polarized schools of fish, they all face always the same directions at the same time. So they swim along, and then it can be a large group. You can have hundreds of fish in a large group. And when they turn as one. So the marine biologists have been studying. So how is it that what's the signal transfer? Because sometimes they turn towards a food source or something, or away from a threat. Is it because one fish signals, we need to move that way, and then all the other fish move? But if you do that, you'd always see a ripple moving through the group. You see some fish turning and then other fish turning. Maybe it's a vibration in the water. Maybe it is a chemical release. Maybe all of these things would require a ripple through the school, but there isn't. They move as one. As one. There's no delay between what the first fish moves and the other fish on the other side moves. How is that? They can't explain that with the visual or sensory, with the five senses that we have. Yeah. Another sense going on. The same thing with, you look at birds, you know, the notion of a murmuration of starlings. I don't know if you've seen these birds that in the evening, they fly. They're actually going after insects and things, usually lower down when the insects are out in the dusk, and they're flying around as a group. It also is play, because it's clear that they're not just, and there's some good books on this, that they're doing this for the joy of doing this. Now, joy may be manifest in a different way in the bird brain, so to speak, but they're still doing this in an exaltation of their flight, of the evening, of the day, however it is. And the way they move with, again, groups of hundreds of birds, when you look at it from the human perspective, it looks like an amoeba in the sky. It's like it's pulsing and it's dense, this black blob that is moving around. The outlines are quite clear. And they move so fast. And they're so close together. You know, humans can't do that. We'd have to say, turn on your blinker. You know, which way are you going to turn? You know, or we do synchronized swimming where we all, but then we have to study, and it's not spontaneous. How do these birds do this so spontaneous? And they don't crash into each other. You never see boink and two birds falling out because by mistake they ran into it. You don't see that. So my idea is that we have this sense as well. We can do this. I mean, mammals do this. The herds of gazelle which bound around, they don't. They also do this. Great grace and beauty. And learning to do that means a different kind of listening. And this is where we go to the evolutionary intuition. So this is Syntony, is that being able to move and flow in dynamic environments in a way that allows us to sense the next move without trying to figure it out up here, or base it on rational decision making. Should I turn left, and that kind of thing. It's a sense of flow. And we move as the whole, move rather than individually. We really are this greater sense of what in South Africa is called Ubuntu, and other places they talk about this as an interbeing. Right. In terms of evolutionary intuition, how does this Syntony sense work? Well, for me, it's a kind of intuition. Again, it is a sense. I mean, you have, just like sight and taste and touch and smell, and hearing, you have all of these. We also have a Syntony sense. We often ignore it, though, because it tends to be more like a sense of appropriateness that we sometimes override by second guessing it. You know, when it really kicks in the modern world is when we get into a crowded elevator. We get into a crowded elevator and everybody automatically adjusts. We don't have to say, could you move? And I'm going to step over there. It's just automatic. We do that. We do these kind of things. We can do this, automatically flow and fit in an appropriate harmony, a dynamic harmony, which is another way of talking about Syntony. And the evolutionary intuition is this sense that has become atrophied. It's dangling off the edge of our consciousness these days, that we can exercise and bring it back. If we listen, not just with our ears, but we listen with our heart, and we listen with our gut, and we listen into what's this seeking to emerge, and how can I be part of that emergence in a healthy, whole way? That is very much this evolutionary intuition, because it's informed by, it's not just intuition of like, I think this is going to be good for me, but it's like, is this part of a larger narrative, a flow of being and becoming, and listening into that narrative. Again, it's not words. It's another sense. And it's what the animals do. How can we do that? Last thing here. I said last thing before, but I'm sorry. When we use our technologies here to navigate with, we have a GPS. If it doesn't work, we're stuck often. And we become app dependent instead of app enabled. And being stuck like that is where our Syntony senses atrophied. You put an indigenous person in the woods, somebody who has lived in nature for all their life, in the middle of the night, on a cloudy night, in the woods, in the middle of the night, they would feel at home. They would be like, oh, I'm surrounded by my friends, the trees and the bushes and the animals here at night. I know exactly where I am in the forest. You put me or most people, in the woods in the middle of the night on a cloudy night, I'm like, I don't know where I am and I don't know where to go and I'm lost. They're always found because the trees always know where they are. So being able to listen in that way is, again, an evolutionary capacity we have, and it's just become atrophied. That's my thesis, really.
I have so many questions and things that we could unpack and delve into. It's such an exciting topic, which of course also aligns with my own work, and I just find it so delicious. One question around evolutionary intuition, because I think quite a lot of people would find that experience of intuition quite far from their experience of daily life within work, leadership, organization, which is, of course, my area of focus from a business perspective or work perspective. Do you believe that everyone has access to an evolutionary intuition?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think of it in terms of expanding universes. So my most intimate world in which Syntony is at play is my own being. It's biological, biophysical, it's psychological and social, but it's my being. So how am I in Syntony with myself? This is a first Syntony sphere. And at that level of the Syntony sphere, it's really, am I in harmony, dynamic harmony with myself from my nutrition and my exercise, my sleeping, but not only those things? Am I, whatever you want to call, at peace? Am I engaged? How am I? What's my balance? What is the dynamic harmony of my own being and emotionally and all of that? All of that monitoring and sensing into, okay, where am I? Where is it off inside of me or in my being? Where's it off? That's checking your Syntony standing or status, right? And then the second level is the interpersonal. Now you come into families, organizations, communities of all sorts, neighborhoods, and you're like, how am I in relations with others? Is this a healthy relationship, or is this one where we're playing games? Is this dysfunctional in this group, or is there a thriving sense of trust? So there's another Syntony sense that you can bring in when you're sensing into the dynamic harmony of the social dimension. The third level beyond that is, so the five, right? So there's intrapersonal, the interpersonal between people. Then there's the transhuman. So how am I with nature? Am I stepping on nature's toes? Am I doing things which are not sustainable? Or is it feeding me as I'm feeding it, kind of thing? So you're thinking of yourself in relationship with your supporting living environment and being part of that living. And then the fourth dimension brings you into time. And now you start to say, how am I with my ancestors? I mean, am I doing them proud right now in my ways of being? And am I also being a good future ancestor? How am I with future generations? Would they thank me for the decisions I'm making now that could possibly impact them in the future? So that brings you into that kind of Syntony sensing over time. And the fifth and last sphere of this is the pan-cosmic, because all of these spheres are our world, our planet, that's kind of like where we are. Yes, absolutely. And yet it's part of a much larger narrative, a much larger story. And if we remember that we are part of this wonderful unfolding story in the universe, and that the expression of the earth and the solar system and all the balance that is here is part of another balancing that is going on in the cosmos. So that pan-cosmic Syntony is kind of tapping into source and what people get through to meditation, and feeling at one with the world. And the Dalai Lama is engaged in this all the time. How do we do that kind of peace? And that brings you right back to the first one, which is intrapersonal Syntony. Intra, within. Those are the five: intrapersonal, interpersonal, trans-species, transgenerational, and then pan-cosmic.
I love the way you have framed that. It makes it easier, I think also for some of the listeners and viewers, it makes it easier to grasp, because you speak into a framework that the brain can understand a little bit easier. And I think that's some of the challenges with working in a life-centric way, or speaking of life-enhancing leadership or life-enhancing organizations. It seems a little hard to grasp. So it's also finding different type of resources and experts like yourself that can give some language and understanding, so that hopefully more visionary leaders will adapt these methodologies, so we can get into balance with humanity and the planetary boundaries that's a little bit out of whack at the moment. So we have work to do.
We do indeed. For me, a big balancing in this is getting out of our heads. Yes, Western people, we are so often figuring everything out and having better answers than nature. Like, we come up with these machines to be able to extract, the excess CO2 from the environment. There's no better machine than the tree to do this. Not a machine, but the point is, we think we can be smarter than. The idea is, how do we learn to be part of the flows? But that's, again, a lot of it is really heart-centered. And intuition also is gut-centered. The neurons, they're finding these, right? The neurons, not only in the brain, Heart Math Institute is finding it's in the heart. And we also have ways of knowing that come from the gut, but we don't listen to that often. And this is that getting out of our heads a little bit. And I really believe, Sandja, and I don't know what you feel about this, but I believe that fundamentally, if we really sat with ourselves and said, is this good? Is this right? We would know. We would know without needing to have someone tell us, look it up in the book, whatever. It's self as instrument. And there's no finer instrument than our being when we use it wholly and fully.
Beautiful. There's a narrative that's emerging in some of the thinkers on leadership and management that talk about separation. That's really where the problem is. What you're talking about is coming back to wholeness, or come back to ourselves.
Our Western world, and I would not hesitate to say, the mind of the Western man very much, it has been that of, aside from domination, control, and certainty, it's obsession, right? We have to really be able to predict everything, and you can't flow with things when you're predicting it all the time, because all you're doing is fulfilling plans rather than co-emerging. So how do you engage with that type of flow? And in a society that almost worships strident individualism and self-righteous independence, it's the John Wayne view of the world, right? Walk into the town and I'm the law. I'll set it all straight. That time has passed. I really think that it's time, not only in our consciousness, but also in our societies. We are actually seeing now much more the collective hero moving forward. And this notion, the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell, the idea that we go through the dark night of the soul and we emerge with a new alchemical being that is now forged in the fires of challenge and self-realization. And we now have perhaps the hero's journey, but it's a collective thing. We're going through this together. And leadership is also now very much a part of, again, you have the leader out front being the sole person. It's an old model. It's a very hierarchical, very patriarchal kind of framing. But I think that the models that are emerging are much more informed by a field, by collective intelligence, by a listening into and a willingness to co-create meaning. And that co-creation of meaning means that kind of Syntony listening into, not just saying, I got to have the answer, and it's just me and my voice, and I'll put my voice in, and then I'll back off again and until I have a new point to make. I mean, we're not connected. So how do we co-create something that really truly is an expression of our interbeing? And for me, this is a part of the quest for collective intelligence. Sandja, I do believe that this is the next stage of human evolution, that we are going to be a species capable of collective intelligence. Right now, AI is coming on and these things are going to feed that, possible. But it requires the capacity, again, to listen into what's appropriate, because if we don't, we can develop AIs that are destructive, right? So the first path of collective intelligence is connective intelligence, knowing who to connect with and what sources of information. And is it whole, healthy, right? That's the holistic frame that you talked about. And together with connective intelligence is empathetic intelligence, something AI doesn't have, and something we really need these days to think together, to co-create, to be this collective hero. We need to have the empathetic intelligence. It requires trust, and that's a big thing. But how do we create those environments? That's the challenge. How do we create those companies, those neighborhoods, those communities where here I'm safe enough to be brave, and because I can be brave together with others, then collective intelligence can thrive.
It's a beautiful world that's emerging on the horizon, and not just emerging on its own. It's people showing up. Like what we're doing here is one little seed of that, but more and more voices and actions that bring it forth. And it does require that we action with presence. Maybe you could take us through your...
Well, you know what I like about this conversation with you is that very much of this notion of Syntony has a lot to do with the idea of passion and the idea of engagement with the world, not just drifting along and drifting through it. When we see what's happening in the world around us, often people will shut down and say, I can't affect this. There's nothing I can do here. This is too much. But if we start to see how our voice is just like the murmuration of starlings, we're part of a bigger flow. And if you take out one of the birds, is it going to make the entire flow of all the birds collapse? No. But if a lot of birds are saying, yeah, we don't have anything to do here, soon you don't have coherence and flow. Gandhi once said this as well, when somebody pointed out, I don't think I'm going to make any difference. Why should I even bother trying? And he was saying, maybe you won't make any difference that you will notice, but it is of the utmost importance that you anyway do it. So being part of the narrative, I think, also helps affect the field. So let's look at what it is here. I'll get to the text in black in a moment because there's the definition, but let's look at the diagram first. So you have in the bottom left what looks to me like chaos. There's a spiral. It's like, oh my gosh, it looks dangerous. You don't want to be sucked into that.
A lot of fear.
Right. Out of control.
Yeah.
It's things spiraling and like what's going on there. So it could be scary going into that. And that's danger. And then there is this in the top right, what is a kind of yin yang, the sky, water, dynamic harmony. And it looks like it's moving fully. Ideally, that would be spinning like beautifully because the planet, and there's a balance there. There's a balance. And so it's just an image that represents a contrast. But these two are connected because they're both our current reality. My brother once said to me, Chris Laszlo, he said, if you were to take somebody and put them on the planet and they just woke up all of a sudden and you were to ask them, is this heaven or hell? I mean, you couldn't tell. There are parts of this place which are hell, and there are other parts which are heaven. So how do we then, what's our part in having to transmute, to somehow do that alchemical twist to allow the emergence of danger or crisis into opportunity? The Chinese symbols for crisis are composed of danger and opportunity. Those are the two symbols. So in every crisis, there's the opportunity for emergence. Every crisis, there's opportunity to bring this into dynamic harmony. So what is that? So Syntony is this. There's 3 different levels of definition. First, the most general definition is that it's conscious intention aligned with evolutionary purpose. You can think of that as the embodiment and manifestation of conscious evolution. How are we somehow manifesting and living, being, humaning well, being the human expression of the universe at this time? Well, we are, but how can we do that consciously, intentionally? And it's a purposeful, creative aligning and tuning with the evolutionary flows of one's milieu, of one's environment. And again, even though it's conscious, it's not rational. See, that's the thing here. It's not like I'm figuring this out. It's like being part of a flow, being part of that river. The second level, a little bit more technical, evolutionary systems thinking. Shortest definition of Syntony is evolutionary consonance. That's like the shortest definition. I like that. Very concise. Okay, but it's very hard to grok that. What does it mean? And again, kind of technically, it's the occurrence and persistence of an evolutionarily tuned dynamic regime. In this way, you might think of ourselves as human tuning forks. What would it be like to be a human tuning fork, aligning ourselves with the patterns of change in our environment, the healthy patterns? And not only as a tuning fork, we're also bringing other patterns into alignment simply by vibrating. It's not a bad metaphor, actually, tuning fork. If you look up Syntony in the dictionary, we will definitely find it in the unabridged English language dictionary. It's a common word in Latin languages, like in Spanish here in Argentina, we will say sintonízate, which means like get with it. It means being part of the flow. Right? Being syntonized. But in English, you will find it as meaning radio engineering. And in radio engineering, it means resonance, the aligning of radio frequency emission patterns. So for me, this intra-being, right, this being more than just my individual separate self, but being part of our collective response consciously, right, is not just resonance, but it's consonance. And the difference between resonance and consonance is that resonance is maybe this radio frequency. You find yourself in this moment of alignment. But consonance is working with that, creating alignment, creating coherent resonance because of the way in which we are.
It resonates very much with me, and what I'm seeing emerging. I've been working this way for a while, but more and more of the top leaders that we work with, the C-suite, boards, VP and up, could you call it an awakening? There's definitely a consciousness that's emerging that these leaders, they know or believe that the way forward is that we have to work on our vertical level of being, our level of consciousness, not just our competence building as we do in traditional business schools and our whole educational system. I wouldn't say it's mainstream. Certainly the companies and leaders that come to the Passion Institute, they know that, they want that. That's the type of people that we work with and help. Not just at the level of leadership or self, understanding, as you're saying, the tuning fork, the more, I like to call it, cleaning my own vessel. The cleaner you become, meaning the more you have tuned yourself, the more the sound that tuning fork is going to resonate in a different way. So the culture that you can create within an organization or an enterprise is going to become equally more healthy. It's going to grow in a healthier direction. Those are the two levels that you talk about, the self and the interpersonal. We also work at the global level. And the New Global Mind, this podcast video scenario is all about, is really to bring that more into the mainstream, because we need to move to the level of understanding global. Very few people are going to be ready for the cosmic level. I think that's beautiful, the people that can, and we need to continue to push the envelope of what's really possible for humanity, because that's the level we're at when you're at that level of cosmic intelligence and interbeing. But at least from an organizational leadership perspective, being able to get to the point where you can think globally, understand the resonance globally, because now we're also talking planetary stewardship. So your work resonates very much with the work that we do at the Passion Institute, just from different framings and a little bit different language, etc. And I think it's important that we play together from the different types of disciplines.
Very much. There's so many points here, but what the Passion Institute is doing around questions of strategic communication and this the transformative potential within organizations, and then in terms of corporate social responsibility and other things within their environment. It's not just social responsibility. I see this as corporate environmental, evolutionary responsibility.
Yes.
Because you're part of a larger narrative. This is what I'm saying here. So when we learn how to be part of the flows that are emerging, that are sustaining us, it's like tapping into the middle of the river where the flow is strong and the nourishment is strong. This notions of being not only a change agent, very key. Right? This is a lot of the leadership is now focusing on how are we change agents. What I think the Syntony approach allows us to do is to be the kind of change agents that are not just changing within the system, which we can do. We can modify things so that they work better and optimize and so on. But how do we play at the boundaries of what's possible? And if you do that, then you're not only a change agent, you're a game changer. And these are the kind of leaders that I think really help not just shape their organization, but shape an industry and shape perhaps even a society. So this is, again, putting it in those contexts of the Syntony spheres helps you do that when you say, am I doing this in harmony with larger frames of being, of interbeing? Or is it just myself, the egocentric frame? How is it framed? And this, I think, is a bigger question of sustainability as well. Because what we're looking for here is not just having organizations and ourselves living within the carrying capacity of our environment, which is classical standard sustainability. We don't overtax, we don't outpace our environment, our environmental carrying capacity. But I think the potential for thrivability is huge. And this is, I think, this stage where we are now in our species. We're at a cusp where we could either destroy everything which we're like, that's a serious possibility. But also the capacity right now for us to create environments, organizational environments, and as well as living environments that are flourishing, where we can celebrate life, not just, again, live within the carrying capacity. It's so boring.
It
I
feels
think
restrictive. And I think that's why
doesn't it?
some people don't like the idea of the verbiage of sustainability. It becomes
Right.
very compliance centric and limiting. I have to limit myself to live within a certain and that's when we come into the mechanistic mindset of measuring and compliance and so forth. But a vast majority of the human minds are still in that mechanistic mindset. My experience is what you're talking about, what I'm talking about. We have obviously sensed it, is that flourishing, the thrivability possibility that becomes in the model, the dark danger.
Yeah.
I think that's where
Yeah.
that language of compliance and restrictiveness really sits. It exacerbates people's fears because it means then I can't live. I can't really unfold myself in that type of dynamic, control, fear, dominance, and so forth. But the other version of that possibility, that beautiful world that we know is possible, as Charles Eisenstein so beautifully and predictably states, that thrivability, once we get into that possibility, it's limitless potential.
Absolutely. And if we feel that we have to engineer thrivability, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot. I mean, it's not about that. It's about relational intelligence, truly. And I think this is where the Passion Institute because it's about that passion of engagement with life, not a sterile engagement. If we love our world and love our environment, we want it to be thriving, alive, passion engaged. So I think this is where it gives us a chance to reimagine what sustainability is in terms of a relational dynamic, which moves from that chaos and scary place to allowing for, without having to create consciously, allowing for the emergence of syntony. Again, syntony is very similar to love because I'm not going to engineer love. I can't force it, but I can create the conditions for it. And there's availability, right? But it has to be something that it's a conversation. It is a dance. It is something that is a relational engagement. It's this aspect of celebrating life. And once we have organizations that we can work in, where all the people who are the internal clients, right, who work there, as well as the external clients, see this as a celebratory engagement in some way. And it's because it's life affirming, future creating, and opportunity increasing. It's up to us. We are the ones. There's no one telling us you can't do this. It means making this part of our DNA of our organizations.
What you're touching on is a switch in how we are approaching, because if we're approaching our environment in a way of what's in it for me, or how can I get my needs met, it's very self-centered, extractive. It's like the mind is forgetting that it has to be a reciprocal relationship. But if you care for it instead, if your approach is to care, then the balance is different. You show up differently.
Is exactly. For me, it's very much this question of foregrounding and backgrounding. If you come there saying, okay, what can I get out of this? And the byproduct is maybe it's going to be good for the company or for the environment and for others, right? Then that's not a sustainable pathway. It just isn't. You may end up maximizing your returns on investment of your own engagements. There's the stresses from the environment are going to come back to you as well. Yeah. And you're going to have to be all the time defending that position, defending what you're getting. Whereas if you switch that around and you say, okay, my primary objective is to see what can I contribute. It's not just a triple bottom line, but it's the triple top line. What am I going to be able to bring in to engagement? Yeah. Right? The top line thinking. So what is it my value add, not just the bottom line, the return, but my value add, and you think in those terms, and then the byproduct is my personal thrivability. And it will be that way when you care for the whole. It's the same thing. If you create a thriving environment that you can be in, whether it's your home or whether it's your garden or an entire ecosystem, and it's safe and thriving, you can relax and be happy there. Whereas if you are only focused on, okay, I'm going to defend myself against all these people and I'm going to learn some martial arts and get everyone away from martial arts are okay, but you do something that is only about defending yourself and keeping yourself, like that's not a good way of living. But we've lived that way. Corporations, Machiavelli, I mean, right? And it's time to change that. We need this collective intelligence.
I know that some people listening to this will say, is that just an idealized picture? Is that really doable? And how can we move in that direction if you're in a more traditional thinking organization and you're starting to move in these different ways that we're talking about here? You'll get eaten alive if you don't have some measure of self-protection in those types of environments. I don't know if you can give some concrete steps. How do we move in that direction?
Well, yes, it is definitely challenging, and not all organizational environments are going to be receptive. So the question is, how do you move in such a way that you're speaking to the listening, as they say, right? So you are using appropriate language of discourse that is going to be able to fit with where the organizational culture is at the moment. So if the organizational culture is what's called pre-active, and it says we want to avoid change at all costs, because we're into maintaining status quo, and anything you're going to suggest to us, if it's not about how do we build a better fortress company, right, the resource-based view of the firm, that we're going to just keep ourselves bolstered. There you come in with ideas about change and about crisis and opportunity, and it's not going to work very well. But you can ask, what would happen if we don't change? There's that. Given that things are changing, because yes, things are changing in the environment. If they don't know that, they're not paying attention. Environment is changing, both business environment and our geopolitical environments are changing. So how, and the technological, okay, so what would happen if we don't change? So that helps the pre-actives perhaps start to consider, okay, there could be consequences. So then how do we change? That's small steps. Then there's the organization which is more reactive than preactive. It says, okay, we will change, but only after other organizations start to change. So show us some.
If it hurts enough, then.
That's right. Then we will do it. We're reactive. Yeah. Exactly. And there you can come in. It can be slightly more agile, slightly more moving with things to say, okay, well, so here's how you can avoid the pain that we can see that's coming, so to speak, and that's, but still avoidance behavior. It's not a kind of leadership that is really bringing forward. But you move beyond the pre-active and the reactive, and you get to the proactive organizations where the culture is, we want to be change leaders, right? We want to. This is our culture. Like we like creative destruction of our market niche. We want to be inimitable. People can't copy what we're doing. Apple did that all the time. Once you started coming up with a new cell phone of certain type, they were already on the next generation. The competitors were competing with the previous generation. That's a kind of guerrilla approach to the marketing, and it's hyper competition. So it can be very tiring, hyper competition, but it's different than the resource-based view of the firm, which is very more conservative. But then you can get to the fourth level, which is really interactive. And I think this is where Syntony has its greatest chance of making change. In organizations that are saying, so how do we not try just to get ahead of the curve, to be in a hyper competition mode all the time? It's risky because, you invest in the 8-track player instead of the cassettes, and you go the way of the dinosaur. They all went the way of the dinosaur. But the point is, being proactive, you can get ahead, and you bank incorrectly if you bank on a blockbuster instead of streaming. So here's the idea. Instead of it being more interactive, is being in a modality that is a more listening modality. You start to then say, well, how are we going to be looking to engage with change? Not just agile, but anti-fragile. And being an anti-fragile organization is leaning into the dynamics of change, not leaning into chaos, because chaos itself it doesn't provide for coherence, but thriving on a changing environment. These are the anti-fragile organizations. It's beyond that.
Resilience?
Well, resilience is bouncing back. It's cool. It's good. But how do you bounce forward? There's the transcendence component. Bouncing back resilience is great. There's a lot of regeneration is the big thing. How you maintain a healthy very important. Healthy environments, resilience and regeneration. But in order to be a game changer and not just play within the bounds of the system, you have to be willing to dream about what could we be? Where's the next evolutionary path that we could go to? Where's the next stage of our corporation, of our company, of our society? And then dream into that, sense into that as well, because it's not just fantasy dreaming, but it's also saying this could work. Then you get things, you get the solar punk visions, you get things that people that 10 years ago were not even imaginable. But if we can imagine those things now and see how we can do that, AI is starting to be a good imagination partner in those lines in terms of what's actually doable. So now we can really have augmented intelligence. This quote from George Bernard Shaw says, You see things as they are and ask why. But I dream of things that never were and ask why not. See, that's the kind of leadership that we need. Not people who are just saying, okay, how can we optimize what we have here and maximize our returns, etc. Right? There's nothing evolutionary about that. No. Nothing evolutionary. But it could be regenerative. It could allow you to maintain that level of flourishing in the current system. But eventually, everything evolves, right? So how are we going to be part of that next step? And I think that's where true leadership comes in. It's playing outside of the bounds.
I had one other question, and I think maybe this is our concluding: transcending our conditioning, transcending the patterns we know and we feel safe with. I listened to an interview where you said this here, where you talked about Syntony sense and your work with that, transcending the patterns we know and we feel safe with. I thought that was so potent and would love to hear you speak more about that.
Well, this is exactly what we were talking about in terms of, moving beyond just regenerating that which is, and it's not. I'm in love with the regenerative movements and the work that people are doing. That it's very important. It's needed. Regeneration is a synonym for healing, and it brings things back into healthy relationship, homeostasis, right? And we also need to have some dynamics, not maybe all of them. This is maybe most right now we need those healing dynamics, but some space needs to be given to the questions of transcendence. And what is that? The systems scientist and physicist Fritjof Capra, in his book, The Turning Point, he defines a living system in its most essential way, the least romantic way. And he says it is self-organization. Oh. Self-organization. We can look at organizations this way as well. So self-organization. So there are three subcomponents of this. A self-organizing system is self-maintaining. So that's we're eating or we're having a cash flow or whatever we're looking at the organization or the personal level. Self-maintaining. Self-renewing. So something doesn't work, something gets hurt, whatever, you are able to regenerate, right? So it's regenerative and it's self-renewing. But it's the third one. He says it's self-transcending. And that for a living system, see, this is a key component of a living system, that is self-transcending. And we do this in our lives all the time. We graduate from kindergarten. We graduate from high school, if possible. And then we go to the next, this is self-transcending. We don't stay at one level of being and just regenerate ourselves at that level, right? Otherwise, we would be big babies. Unfortunately,
let's not go there.
Right? So, but that's getting stuck exactly at one level of evolutionary potential. But because there is both the phylogenetic evolution and where you are looking at the evolution of the species, but there's also the ontogenic or ontogenetic development, which is your own life. And they say ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny is a famous phrase from evolutionary biology, meaning that when we go through the embryogenesis from conception to birth, we go through different phases of the species. We have gills at some point, and we have it looks like we have a tail and so on. So, okay, that's the embryo. And then but we don't get stuck at any one of those phases. In the rest of our life, we also go through these kind of developmental phases. The organization goes through these phases. There's a phase where it is exuberant, childish energy because it's just been founded and everybody's going and doing everything. Then it becomes, more of the teenager and it's going out and conquering and doing stuff. And then there's a level of maturity in the organization. The organizational maturity is standard fare. But how do we then go through these self-transcending moments so that we can think about what is the next phase that we could dream about? Again, you see things as they are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not. That kind of what George Bernard Shaw said, imagining what we could be. That is key to evolutionary organizations. Strategic evolutionary advantage. There's even a paper I once wrote on SEA, not just strategic corporate advantage, but strategic evolutionary advantage. Porter's big work was on corporate advantage. And I think there is a bigger framing that allows us to see ourselves as part of the top line again. What is it we're bringing into society, and not just having our companies be the best, but be also part of a larger expression of humanity. That's my holding of things.
This has been such a pleasure, a rich conversation. This is important work. This is such an important direction. And we need leaders, we need organizations, we need to collaborate, and we need to move on this agenda. It's needed, but it's also, dare I say, fun. It's so much fun because you are alive. There's a richness, you know?
I love that because this is really, again, this is beyond sustainability into thrivability. It's the celebration of our potential, celebration of life. And if we have that as the attractor, not just the fear and the anti, but if we have, what can we dream into? What could we do? It's a grand experiment. The thing is that right now, if we don't do this with heart and soul and mind intact, the global mind, and we don't do it together, but just if we do it just by ourselves, or the risks right now are great. We can actually be a very destructive species. But if we do this in a way which is in greater harmony with each other and with our living environment, using the Syntony sense, then there's a chance that we have these solar punk visions of a real thrivable future where life is celebration. This is the opportunity. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Likewise, I really appreciate your time and being and just your presence. Beautiful. Thank you.
This is the bigger work of the Passion Institute, and I'm just delighted to be a part of it. So thank you again for all of this.
I am Sandja Brügmann, and you have listened to New Global Mind, Leadership for Systems Transformation. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and most of your podcast channels, and our website, thepassioninstitute.com. See you next time.